Happy Easter to you all. My name is Joe. I'm one of the pastors here and the pastor over this Parkland location. And if we have not had the opportunity to meet before, welcome. It's so good to meet you. I will be out in the lobby after service. I would love to connect with you there. Also stick around. You saw there were donuts and coffee. I hope you get to enjoy those. And if this is your first time or your first time back in a while, no, the donuts are not a normal occasion. So if you do return next Sunday and you don't see them, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to apologize in advance to you all. This morning, I want to start by sharing a little bit about me. One thing I really enjoy is TV shows, and there's a particular one that I've been stuck on that I've really been enjoying, and some of you may know it. It's called Andor on Disney Plus. Some of you are aware of this, and if you're not aware of it, it is sort of a prequel TV series to this franchise that you may know as Star Wars. Now, if you don't like Star Wars, I get it. It's a kind of a subpar franchise. I know I said that, but I'm gonna say this: whether you like Star Wars or not, Andor is an exceptional show. And one of the things I really enjoy about Andor is just the story that it tells of this massive evil empire and a group of everyday normal people who resist the empire. And it's a story of good and evil, and there's TIE fighters and blasters, and it's also a metaphor for politics, and it's just a really brilliantly done story. But I also have to admit something. If you do decide to watch Andor sometime this week, I have to warn you, it is the most depressing show I've ever seen in my life. Because as you heard, it's a rebellion, right? And that means there will be sacrifices, there will be loss. And by the time you get to season 2, you're going to be like, Joe, why did you recommend this? The good guys seem to always keep losing. And there's loss, and there's chaos, and there's trials, and it just seems like evil is always winning the day. And spoiler alert, by the end of Andor, the Empire ends up building the Death Star, that big giant contraption that can destroy a planet. So you might be wondering, well, Joe, if the show is that dark and that depressing and that awful, why did you keep watching it? 2 reasons. Number one, Disney Plus costs $20, so every episode I don't watch is 83 cents wasted. I did the math. If there's something you should know about me, it's that I'm cheap, or the kind way to say it is I'm frugal. But the second reason why is because I know something about Andor going into it, and you know something about Andor going into it if you are aware of culture. It's that ever since 1977, you have known how the story ends. Ever since 1977, you've been told, hey, the Death Star will be destroyed by Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader will be overcome, and the Emperor will be overcome, and then there's that unfortunate trilogy where he comes back, but then he's overcome again. My point is, when you're watching Andor, you're not watching it thinking to yourself, I'm not sure where this is going. But instead, you know that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how tragic it gets, no matter how hard it gets, you know that by the end of Andor, you know where the story is heading. You know how the story is going to end. You know that every loss, every child, every challenge, all things will be worked together for good. And that's why you keep watching and you keep watching and go to the next episode. So I know you're questioning then, what does Andor have to do with Easter Sunday? And I think it's a concept that simply goes something like this. Because of Easter, we know the end of our story. And that changes everything. This morning, you are coming in here with your own story that you are currently living. It's the story of your own personal lives. It's the story of your family's lives. It's the story of your community's lives. Some of you may be coming in this morning thinking, my story's pretty great. It's going all right. It might not be the easiest story, but it's a story. I'm living it, and it's going well. I just got back from Hawaii, and it's all good. There are people here I know of. That's their story. And then for some of us, if we're being quite honest and real with ourselves, we're coming in this morning realizing, no, if I'm being genuine, if I'm being just a bit transparent, the story hasn't been all that good. One of the privileges of being a pastor here is that you get to hear a lot of stories. And I know that for some of us, we are walking in with the story of a marriage that's not going all too great. I know for some of us, we are walking in with the story of having kids and not knowing how exactly to take care of them and to raise them, or maybe not being in communication with them once they've grown up. I know this morning there are stories about aging parents. And how do we begin to wrestle with the exhaustion and grief of this new season? For some of us, the story you bring is one of health concerns, of insurance coverages, and financial hardship. For some of you, the story you bring is your own professional career and the difficulties and challenges of it. For some of you, the story you bring is the anxiety and the depression and the war within your mind that is constant even right now. I know for some of you, the story you bring is seeing the world around you in every headline and wondering, when will evil lose? For some of you, you are here and your story is, I have experienced loss and heartbreak, and I'm not sure how to continue on. And what I want to say is, no matter what your story is, no matter what is going on in your life, if there's something that you can take away from this morning, it's simply this: there is a God who knows your story. There's a God who empathizes with your struggle and who will meet you in the middle of it all. And his name is Jesus. As we come in here this morning, and as we think about what it means for God to be with us, I want to note that in our culture, in our society, we have this notion, this idea that God only shows up for the well-to-dos, for the put-togethers, for the right kinds of people, for the good kinds of people, for the happy kinds of people. And I know this for a fact because a couple days ago, I was out and about, and I met someone for the first time, and we were just doing small talk. How's the weather? What you doing this weekend? All those things. And they asked me, what do you do for a living? And I said, I was a pastor. And immediately they took off their hats, and they covered up their tattoos. And they just said, I'm so sorry for being in your presence. And I was like, oh, it's okay, my child. No, I didn't say that. But I did pause, and it sort of made me sad. Because I realized something. If that's the way they're responding to someone who's just a pastor, who is just a person, who is just communicating something that God has to say, that's all they are not God himself. How often do people do that in the presence of God? How often do they do that when they think of approaching God? How often do they think, I need to take off my hat, I need to cover up my tattoos, I need to present myself in a way that is worthy and holy, or I can never approach God? And if you've fallen into that belief, this cultural idea, I kind of want to tell you, I want to kind of change and get rid of that notion. I want you to maybe deconstruct that idea, as you could say. Because one thing that is certain, one thing that is clear in the scriptures over and over again is that God doesn't wait for you to clean yourself up. God doesn't wait for you to get it all together. And God certainly doesn't run from your troubles, but he walks towards them and is to be found in the midst of them. And one great example of this is in a story where Jesus shows up to a grieving community. You find it in John chapter 11. I invite you to go ahead and read that later today. But for this morning, we're just going to read a snippet of that. So if you will turn your attention to the screen, we are in John 11. We'll be reading verses 17 through 31. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. I don't know how many times you've heard this story before. It could be a first occasion for you. It might be a 100th or 1,000th occasion for you. But I do want you to notice one key detail in this story is that on one of the worst weeks of Martha and Mary's life, Jesus was with them. And he was moved by them. The scriptures say he was troubled and that he wept with them. You may be bringing in some idea of God with you this morning. It might be that God is disappointed in you. It might be a God who is angry with you. It might be a God who is distant with you. For some, it might be a God who is non-existent altogether. And if you have come this morning realizing you are dissatisfied with that vision of God, then I have a better option for you. In Christian belief, one of the things that we hold to, if it's a central core belief, if you can call it that, it is that we have the audacity to say that we know a little bit about something of what God is like. And we can have that audacity and we can say we know what God is like because we say when we look at Jesus, when we hear the things he says and when we see the things he do, we can see God himself saying those things and doing those things. If we look at Jesus, we see what God is like. And if we look at John chapter 11, if we read the story and we're thinking it through the lens of as we see Jesus, we are seeing God, what we realize is that God is someone who shows up on our worst days. God is someone who is willing to be troubled by our situation and circumstances. And God is not too proud to be someone who cries with us, whose heart breaks with us. His presence is near to the brokenhearted and the crushed in spirit. And for some of you this morning, that's the message you needed to hear. That's the comforting news you needed to know. That no matter what it is you're going through, no matter what turn your story has taken, God is in the middle of it. And God is there with you, sharing in your tears. And then for others of us, that may be comforting, but also it's kind of frustrating. It's kind of angering. It's kind of bothersome. And in fact, some of you this morning may hear this story and think much like Mary and Martha and say, wait a minute. If Jesus really cared that much, then why wasn't he there for Lazarus? If Jesus knew he was going to show up and heal Lazarus anyways and make him rise back from the grave, then why did Jesus allow those things to happen? Why did he show up 4 days late? And this question is not something we just ask of the story, but it's the same question we ask of our own stories. We all have our Lazaruses. We all have those moments where we question Jesus and ask, "Where are you? And why did this thing happen? And how could you let it happen?" And so on and so forth. For 2,000 years in Christian history, people have been asking this question. And the academic word for it is the problem of theodicy. But another way to put it is simply, why does a good God permit the bad to happen? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is Easter Sunday. We should be celebrating. Who invited this one to speak today? And if you're new, right, you're thinking to yourself, oh, goodness, we picked that church, didn't we? But don't worry, there's hope at the end. And one of the reasons why I bring up bad news and bad things is because this morning doesn't make sense if there was never any bad things. There's no good news to share if bad things didn't happen. Bad things happened to Jesus. It was just a couple days ago that Jesus was crucified and he was murdered and he was buried and there was no hope. And then we come together this morning on Resurrection Sunday, on Easter Sunday, to say now there is hope, there is good news in the midst of tragedy. And unfortunately, though, what we realize, though, is that oftentimes in our own lives, bad things happen as well. And one of the frustrating truths that I have to share with you this morning is that no matter how much you read the Bible, no matter how long you're a part of church, no matter what seminaries you go to, what books you read, what religions you pursue, at the end of the day, one of the most frustrating things about God is that he never really ever gives a reason for why our stories must be this difficult. But one of the wonderful things about the God of the scriptures, about the God we know in Jesus Christ, is that the one thing he does tell us is he tells us how the story ends. We know how the story of Lazarus ends in chapter 11, that eventually Lazarus is healed and he comes out of the tomb and he is alive again. We know how the story of Jesus ends as well. He was on the tomb at the end of Good Friday, and he is risen again on Easter Sunday. And one of the things we celebrate every Easter Sunday for over 2,000 years is simply this news that what happened to Lazarus and what happened to Jesus is what will happen to us in the broken world we live in. That is the good news of Easter. It is the good news that we may not know why the story is difficult, but we know how the story ends. And if life has felt like nothing but the death of you, then the good news this morning is that you are due for a resurrection. You are due for new things. You are due for the recreation of all things and all things on earth being as it is in heaven and everything being good and true and beautiful. That's what we are heading towards. So that's the good news of Easter. But now here's the other part of Easter that we don't really like, is that we get to know how the story ends, but we don't get to choose when the story ends. Only God gets to decide that. And I don't personally like that every time I hear it. I know it's true, but I don't necessarily like that it's true. And if I can be real with you for just a moment, sometimes I think I would make a better author of life. I would make a better God, because let me tell you what I would do if I was the author of your story. Lazarus would never have gotten sick and died. Jesus would have never been crucified. None of you would be here because there would be no Easter Sunday. And next week, none of you would pay taxes. Those are the stories that I would craft. And if I'm being serious, I would also think about why so many wars and why so many diseases and why is God so delayed and getting it all together again. If he promises to make all things new, if he promises to restore all things, if he promises to overcome death, then why not now? And the answer Scripture gives us is simply this. And he said it in the book of Isaiah. He says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." There's a theologian by the name of Anne Lamott who once said, "The only difference between me and God is that God never thinks he's me." We often think we are like God and we can know the mind of God and we can know what God is up to. But what God reminds us in the book of Isaiah is that we don't really know what's going on with God. We don't really know the world as it is. We don't really know the direction God is taking the story. And that can be frustrating. That can be scary to think that we don't get to have all the answers in this life. And so one option we can choose is we can say, well, if that's how God's going to be, if I can't know who God is and I can't be God myself, then I don't want to follow him. I don't want to trust in him. I don't want to celebrate this thing called Easter. That doesn't seem like a good deal. But I want to propose a different option this morning, because if you know that God reveals himself in Jesus, and if you consider that he is the God that empathizes with you, and he is the God that shows up in the middle of your trouble, if he's the God that cries with you, if he's the God that promises you, I know how your story ends, and it ends with resurrection, and it ends with renewal, and it ends with recreation. If you know all those things about God, then maybe it's worth trusting that he knows what he's doing. Even when it doesn't make sense to us, and even when it feels like nothing is going right for us. This morning, as we head out and go about the rest of our days and have our exceptional Easter egg hunts and have our dinners and go on with the rest of our lives, we can decide to trust in Jesus. We can decide not to trust in Jesus. But no matter what decision you make about Jesus, one thing that is true about your life that I can guarantee with 99% accuracy is that it is either going to be hard or it is hard. And there's no other option you get. Life is difficult. Life is troubling. Life can be taxing. And when that life happens, the question to ask yourself is, what do I want to be true of my reality? Do I want my suffering to be meaningless? Do I want to doubt tragedy? Do I want to have questions about how this story ends? I think that's one option we can take on. But I want to invite you this morning to maybe have the audacity to believe the good news of Easter, that there's a different way to deal with life. And there's a different way to approach it. And it's to say that because of Jesus, we know the end of our story, and that changes everything. I would invite you to maybe consider that that is the way to view life, that is the most hopeful way to live life. Because when we accept that Jesus brings us to the end of our story, then we can accept that all suffering can be redemptive. And no death is final, and only what is good and true and beautiful will remain. I can't make that decision for you this morning of whether you will trust that this is the end of your story, but I can't think of a more beautiful ending to this story that we are all living. And so this morning, it's just an open invitation. I invite you to follow Jesus. I invite you to get to know him. I invite you to say and embrace that no matter what is happening in my life, I know where this is all heading, and it's heading for my good. So there's three responses I want to welcome you to this morning that you can partake in. The first one is simply this: if you have never considered following Jesus before, if this is something that you would like to talk about, if you would like to pray about it, if you would like to explore baptism this morning, we are openly inviting you to do so. And if you've never heard of baptism before, it's simply a symbol, a practice that we do where we put someone underwater for 3 seconds, not 3 days, by the way, and then we pull them out. And the reason why we do this is what we're saying is Jesus died and Jesus rose again. And as we do this for other people, what we're saying is you are sharing in Jesus' destiny as well. As you put your faith in him, as you follow him, as you say yes to the hope of Easter, what you're saying is, yes, what happened to Jesus will also happen to me. And we have 4 people who have decided to do that this morning. And if you yourself feel like, man, I would like to do that, or I would like to explore that option, all you simply have to do is go through these doors right here. We'll have a conversation with you. And yes, we have towels and extra clothing as well if that's something you would like to do this morning. The second thing I would like to invite you to is, if you've already been baptized and you've been following Jesus and you find yourself here on Easter morning, something I'll admit to is that it is really easy to lose the plot. It's really easy to get caught up in everything that is happening and to forget the true hope that Jesus brings. And if this morning you feel like, I really want to get back to that, I want to rededicate my life to following Jesus, I want that hope for myself this morning, there's a way you can do that. Over here we have a station with some pens and some rocks. Something we do as a tradition every Easter at Rainier View is we invite people to go ahead and take a rock. Write your name on it, write a date on it, and just go ahead and put it in that jar. And what that jar symbolizes is your rededication to following Jesus and trusting in the good hope that he brings. So that is an option for you as well. And then finally, the last thing we would invite you to is the Lord's Supper. We have 2 tables at the front and 2 tables at the back. When you approach, you will find a cup, and it looks like there's only juice in it. There's also a cracker beneath as well, so make sure you take both cups. And the reason why we celebrate this supper every single week is what we are saying is the bread represents the broken body of Jesus, the cup represents his shed blood. And what we say is that God loved us so much that he sacrificed himself and gave himself up so that we might be forgiven, so that we might have new life, and so that there is a happy ending that is due for all of us when God will come back and make all things new. And especially this morning, we don't take the bread and the cup and say, oh, thanks, Jesus. We're going to remember you, but we're happy you did what you did. It's not like some memorial that we're doing. What we're doing is we are recognizing that Jesus is very present with us and very here with us, because on Easter morning, what we say is that Jesus is alive and he is with us and he is present. So as we take the bread and as we take the cup, we are literally inviting the real presence of Jesus in our very midst. And so as I close us in prayer, once again, baptism's through the door. There's docs right here that you can rededicate your life to Jesus. And then the table is open for you as well. So would you join me in prayer as we head into this time of worship? Jesus, I thank you for the resurrection, for the way this changes all things, for the greatest historical event of our lifetimes that can give us hope beyond hope, hope beyond our wildest imaginations, hope in the midst of trouble and hardship, hope that breaks into whatever story we are living today. Jesus, I ask that for each and every single one of us, would we have a rekindling of that hope in our hearts this morning. May we walk away today knowing we do not have to fear and there's nothing to be troubled by, for you are with us and you are for us. And one day all things will be made new. We thank you for the promise of that last day when all things will be made right. We thank you for the present promise of the forgiveness of sins, of relationship with God, and of being able to taste your goodness in the here and now that sustains us. We thank you for being a gracious God that meets us in the midst of all life circumstances. And we praise you for it. And we pray this all in your name, Jesus. And all God's people said, amen.